that you're my height because now we're eye
Yeah, we're
level.
even, right?
I wanted to do a series on being a pro because when you get into the industry, you're like, what does that word even mean? How do you become a pro? The hardest thing that I've heard is not just getting in the industry, but staying in the industry. You've been in it for about a decade. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, yeah.
What has been the hardest part about staying in it?
You know, it's kind of hard when you think about obviously wanting to maintain relevance, but also wanting to stay true to who you are at the same time. And so for me, I've been in this, yeah, for really looking back, essentially a decade, but I've had so many different roles throughout. So whether it was being a full-time writer, whether it was doing on-camera stuff, whether it was in arena hosting, I've done so many things that I think sort of overall contributed to my like holistic career, if you will, that sort of kept me versatile at the same time. And with that being said, I feel like I've always remained true to myself throughout all of those roles, where now a decade into this, I can say I'm fully confident in who I am and the work that I've done to really maintain sort of a place in this crazy world.
GALvanize, it's all about your who, not what you do. But personally, I have really been struggling with that lately because your life is your job. That's all you know. Does this business sometimes get a hold of you and you lose that?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's so funny because I don't do the camps necessarily, but you and I were talking off camera, and Laura has come to the Chargers a few times, and I've sat in that room and listened to all these athletes talk about their who, and I sit there and go, what is mine? And when you reference something like that, the other part of it for me is my husband also works in sports too. So we are literally a household. Now we're a two-sport household. He works in hockey, I work in football. It's hard. We have had conversations like, whoa, we can't talk about work right now. We can't let this dominate who we are as people. And so it is challenging at times because I think a lot of it too is there's a social media element to all of this, right? Where you're online and you're trying to maintain sort of a role, but you can't let it define you because all of this could go away tomorrow. And I think we learned a lot of that during the pandemic where roles changed. And so for me, I think that helped me sort of refocus and reshift and figure out, this isn't my identity. You know, Hayley, the reporter, Hayley, the on-air presence is great, but that's not Hayley. However, I do like to say, I like to be the same person in both, and who you see on camera, I like to think, we could ask Laura this, is the same person off camera.
I can confirm our conversation off camera is very similar
Okay, good.
to this one right here. You mentioned social media. How much pressure, I know for me, I need to get off Twitter sometimes. How much pressure does that put on you now recently in your career?
There is pressure, but at the same time, I might have a slightly different approach, I think, than some people. I took a kind of an online class from a woman who works in sports marketing, and she used to rep a couple Chargers players, and she was talking to them about their brand, if you will, and she had made it very clear, you are who you are. Like, your brand is who you are. And so for me, on social media, Twitter is probably more news focused. On Instagram, you're gonna get cat photos, you're gonna get maybe what I cook on the weekends. Like, I like to be a person. And I think when you talk about the who, that's it, right? There is a pressure to kind of keep up, but I just don't subscribe to the notion of having to sort of just flaunt everything. And for me, there is a pressure to keep up, and I think sometimes it's not sort of the atypical way, or it's not the typical way of looking at it in the industry, but it's who I am and it's what works for me, and I think I'm okay with that and I'm at peace with that.
Do you feel like earlier on in your career you had to almost pretend to be someone that you weren't?
I think so, and I think that's a lot of sort of what we get caught up in when we're young here, right? Is, oh, we have to sound a certain way, we have to look a certain way, we have to put on the reporter voice and do all those things, and then one day you're like, stop, that's not it.
Was there an experience you had to go through to learn that lesson?
Yeah, I think the last couple years of just navigating through COVID was challenging because you had the NFL literally put essential and non-essential labels on roles within the organization. And so, again, you had to realize, okay, just because I don't have like the wristband to get into the building for these 6 months, that doesn't mean I'm not an essential part of this entire workforce. And so I think going through something like COVID sort of shifted that mentality that I had of that's okay. We're still getting the work done. We're just doing it on a computer instead of being in person. And there are a lot of people going through the same thing, and a lot of people going through really worse things too. But at the end of the day, you sort of figure it out, and I think that was definitely indicative of that.
Well, thank you, Hayley, with a push and a hug.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I love your shoes.
Oh, thank you.
I kept looking at them.